Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to 30 Letters in 30 Days. Tonight is letter number 15. That means we are halfway through. And there's a lot of feedback that I would like to share, as well as some interesting updates about women's groups all over the world that are meeting to discuss these classes, but I'm going to hold off on that because tonight's letter is a very long letter. As you've probably noticed, the lengths of these letters can vary quite a bit. So tonight's quite a long letter. Tomorrow night is on the short side. So tomorrow night, with Hashem's help, I would like to make some announcements and answer some questions. We've been getting questions at 30letters30days.com and take care of some other business. But tonight, if it's all right with everyone, and I'm sure it is, I'm going to jump straight into tonight's letter without any further delay. Okay. Baruch Hashem, Yud Ches Tevis Tavshin Tesvav, Brooklyn, Bracha V'Shalom. This is the 18th day of the Hebrew month of Tevis, the year 5715. That's 1954, probably 55 already at that point. This is in the middle of the winter. Bracha v'shalom is how the Rebbe addresses a woman. This is a letter to a woman. Now, you don't know who this person, well, maybe you do. I shouldn't assume that. Maybe you are the person that this letter was written to. Maybe someone out there is. But when I say you, meaning collectively, this worldwide, global, virtual classroom that's been studying these letters together, we don't know who this woman is, by name at least, but we kind of know her because, do you remember a few nights ago the letter to the group of girls, the Kvutzas Nairos? And remember they used a self-deprecating expression. They said, we're so cold to spirituality. We have a sea of coldness within us. And the Rebbe didn't like that. And he told them that they have within them that power of their great and courageous parents. So if you remember that letter, and if not, you can just check a few classes earlier. It was the first letter that we did on Motzei Shabbos, I believe, if I'm correct. I think letter 12. So tonight's letter, 15, is to the teacher of that same group of girls. And it's interesting to see the same situation, but from a different angle. And here's where you can kind of see how two parties who are dealing with the exact same situation may get different guidance from the Rebbe, which shouldn't be surprising at all because, as we know, you don't answer the question, you answer the questioner. So it always depends. Who are you speaking to? And then everything follows from there. B'mayna al michtava mechov vav Kislev. In answer to your letter from the 26th day of Kislev, that would be the second day of Hanukkah. It's interesting here. This is a relatively long response time because this is like over 3 weeks later. We're used to seeing letters where the Rebbe is writing back very, very quickly. This is 3 weeks. Remember, the letter's coming from Eretz Yisrael, so coming all the way over from halfway across the world. And this is the 1950s, but at least according to what we've been getting used to, yeah, 3 week response time is on the long side. I guess we're spoiled. Okay. La'achre shesikosa hochi aruka. After a prolonged or a very prolonged silence. So the Rebbe says, I got your letter after a long time of not hearing from you. Now we know that Rebbe asks people all the time, write more, write more often, like we say in Chicago, vote early, vote often, right? The Rebbe is always telling people, I want more mail from you. I want to hear more details from you. So the Rebbe here says, I didn't hear from you for a long time. Asher gam bohovi becheshben hanimukim al zeh shekeseves. Even taking into account the excuses that you give, why it's been a while since you've written, adayin eina miskabelas, it's not really acceptable. Aval ein tzoykin ala over. We've had that before also, the Rebbe is saying. But alas, there's no point bemoaning what's already in the past. Ubavadei yisakein mikan ulahaba, but surely this will be fixed, or yisukan maybe, mikan ulahaba, this will be fixed from now on in the future. So I'm not bemoaning the past, but from now on, please, let's hear from you more often. Okay. Umasha keseves shitzarich lizar ba'ofen haksiva chulu v'chulu. Regarding what you write, that you're trying to be really careful about how you write. As you're going to see, the Rebbe is talking about her, I guess, her desire to use euphemism, not to say anything harsh. And it's very interesting because if you remember, the letter to this woman's students began with the Rebbe taking exception to their use of harsh language about themselves. The Rebbe was saying, don't speak that way, even for poetic effect, if you remember. Here, the Rebbe says almost the opposite to the teacher. Okay, let's see here. So you're telling me you're being very careful about your wording, like you're trying to be very delicate in your phrasing. Harei b'med devorim emurim. When is that applicable? When is it applicable that you should be really careful not to say anything harsh? Kishekosfim inyonim diplomatiim she'enim noigim ela min hasafa l'chutz. When you're writing diplomatic stuff that anyways doesn't really matter, it doesn't really mean what it's supposed to mean. Ubemela ha'ikar b'zeh yefi amalitza v'chaved hameduma. And then when you're writing diplomatic stuff, so the whole point is to write it pretty and to give people the honor that, the pretend honor that you're supposed to go through the motions of, playing along this whole diplomacy. The whole thing is a bluff, right? So when we're diplomats and we're just talking diplomacy, so the whole thing is just blowing hot air, and that's the style. Mashen Kain, however, in contrast, bidvorim hakshurim im hergesh halev, if you're talking about real emotions, ubefrat binyanim hashayochim legerul nafshes hanoyard, especially you're speaking about the spiritual destiny of the youth, the Rebbe is about to say, then we don't sugarcoat it. If you're speaking things of the heart, okay, you're trying to explain your emotions. I think this is very important. I knew a guy once who told me, I went to therapy for years and it didn't help. But it's probably because therapy is not effective if you lie to your therapist. So I said, why did you lie to your therapist? And the guy said, well, I was paying him way too much money to be able to afford him having a negative impression of me. So if you try to sugarcoat things, you're not going to make any progress. The Rebbe is saying here, you're trying to be polite, and I appreciate that, but this is not the place for being polite. And this is very interesting because to the students, the Rebbe was saying almost the opposite thing of like, wow, your language is really, really harsh. Come on, cut it out. Here the Rebbe is saying, I need you to stop sugarcoating. You're going to have to say it as it is. Because when you're speaking about your emotions, when you're speaking about your feelings, you got to say your feelings as they are. And also, there's two things here that I was saying. You have to say your feelings the way they are. And especially when you're talking about, and she's a teacher of young women, so her feelings here are connected with her feelings about teaching the youth. And also, it seems, her description of the spiritual status of these youth that she's working with. So the Rebbe is saying, tell it as it is. Tell me what's going on with these girls. They're just starting off in their lifetimes. Every little detail that's going on now is going to have ramifications for decades. So you got to you can't mince words with me. You got to tell me how it is with these girls. If you're going to use cosmetics, the Rebbe says, you're going to cover up the true situation. That causes damage, not rectification. So that's the first interesting thing, I think, from this letter, is that Rebbe is telling this educator, please, I understand there's something called lashon nikiya, called euphemism. And by the way, the Rebbe more than anyone was into don't say a negative word when you can avoid it, even if you have to take a roundabout way. You know, this is the famous Maimon Chazal based on in Parshas Noach, right? The story of Noach bringing the animals aboard the Teva on the ark. So why doesn't it just say the animals that are Tahir and the animals that are Tomei? There's a word for it. It's called Tomei. Instead, it says the ones who are not Tahir, who are not ritually pure, right? So the point is, because if you can avoid saying a negative word, then you avoid it, even if it causes you to use extra words, which the Torah in general is very sparing not to use extra words, right? There's a sikh about this actually in Chelik Yod of Likutei Sichos, the second sikh of Noach. But it's interesting. Over there in that sikha, it says, it's interesting with the story of Noach, it avoids using the word tamei. But like, let's say in the whole Sefer Vayikra, when it's teaching us, well, we just had it last week, Parsha Shmini, right? We're learning about the kashrus of animals. So there it uses the word tamei all the time. So which one is it? Are we avoiding the word or we're not avoiding the word? So in that sikha, the Rebbe says, look, with Noach, it's telling a story. It's just telling a story. So if it's telling a story, it's not really negeya. It's not pertinent to anybody's behaviors. Let's avoid using the negative word. But in Sefer Vayikra, when it's telling us halachas that we need to follow, so then you have to say it as it is. And if you have to say a harsh word like tamei, you say the word in order that a person should know what to do and what not to do. So I think it's a similar thing as that sikha. Here the Rebbe is saying, look, there are cases where we avoid using negative language because there's no point to it. But here, I have to know what's really going on because this is negeya, this is pertinent to these girls' futures, and every little detail now is going to have this ripple effect. So you got to say it as it is. Okay. Now, here's the next little bit of the letter. A very interesting idea as well regarding the concept in Torah, and especially in Chassidus, of Kabbalah's oil. Kabbalah's oil literally means acceptance of the yoke, or the full expression is Kabbalah's oil Malchus Shemayim, acceptance of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. And it means submission to authority, to godly authority. Okay. That's a difficult concept. And it's a concept I think a lot of people struggle with today. You know, how much of education has to be about teaching the students discipline, and how much of it is about convincing them and encouraging them and getting them to want something on their own. Now, as you've learned, everything in Torah is a paradox. So is it about discipline, or is it about convincing somebody that something's good for them? Yes. Which one is it? Is it self-discipline, or is it convincing them that something's good for them? Yes, I told you. Yes, it's both. How can it be both? You're about to see how it's both. Okay. Nanesi. Okay, the Rebbe says, I enjoyed. You said that the situation has improved in many ways. Specifically about the participation of the girls group. This is the same girls group from the previous letter. And they're conducting themselves in a Hasidic way. It is superfluous, I'm sure, to reiterate, to mention again, that it is mentioned in the books of Chassidus, as well as, and this is very interesting that Rebbe says this, in non-Jewish works, al dvar ha'achrech shel Kabbalah's oil, about the necessity of Kabbalah's oil, of accepting the yoke of heavenly authority. It's very interesting. The Rebbe is saying this is a concept in Chassidus and also Lahavdil. The Rebbe doesn't even say Lahavdil here, but even in non-Jewish wisdom, meaning to say this is not something, if I can insert my own commentary, the value of Kabbalah's oil need not be taken on Kabbalah's oil. In other words, you don't have to accept it from an argument of authority that says so in Torah, so therefore you have to believe it. If you want something that can appeal even to the intellect of your animal soul, even the non-Jewish books say that it's good for you to have some modicum of self-discipline and submission to authority. So it's interesting. Even Kabbalah's oil, you don't have to take on Kabbalah's oil because, this is the paradox I was referring to earlier, and the Rebbe is going to speak about it at length. Even Kabbalah's oil, even submission is something that can be explained as beneficial to you. Okay, let's continue here. Ubaloshon Rebbe Seinu Zal Hagdamas Nasa L'Nishma, or like our Rebbes say, what does it mean to submit to authority? It means, in the classic case of the Jewish people before they accepted the Torah, when Moshe Rabbeinu prepared them at Sinai for accepting the Torah, the Jewish people's response collectively was Nase V'Nishma. We will do, and then we will understand. So they put first the commitment to do before hearing and understanding what it is that they're doing and why. Pshita she'ena kavona bezeh l'sigufim u'shviras hanefesh v'haguf b'temidius. Now, let me explain something. It's obvious. The Rebbe says it's obvious. Now, I've said this before. Sometimes the Rebbe says things are obvious, and they weren't obvious to me, at least. But if the Rebbe says it's obvious, that's a cue to me to sit down and to think it over once, twice, three times, until it becomes pshita, until it becomes obvious. Okay? So the Rebbe says here, it is obvious that when we talk about the necessity of Kabbalah's oil, this does not mean sigufim. Sigufim is mortification, like self-punishment. And it doesn't mean shviras hanefesh v'haguf b'temidius. It doesn't mean constantly breaking down your body and soul. It's very important to understand this. We're not talking about an oppressive yoke, and surely not something that's abusive, God forbid. God forbid. And I think that needs to be clarified, because if someone had a negative experience where there was religious abuse being whitewashed with the name, with the rubric of this is Kabbalah's oil, you have to understand that is not Kabbalah's oil. The Rebbe says Kabbalah's oil is good for you. Even non-Jewish wisdom agrees that it's good for you, and the Rebbe is going to continue to elaborate on this point, that it's good for you, and it's certainly not something that's going to cause you pain, and it's not going to break you. We're not talking about shattered self-esteem, God forbid. That's not Kabbalah's oil. We're not talking about a big person bullying a little person to get them to comply. That's not Kabbalah's oil. The way that Rebbe explains Kabbalah's oil here is, it is actually a logical imperative, and I think that's why the Rebbe references that you can even find it in the non-Jewish books, that you don't have to take this on faith. This is something that human wisdom, not godly wisdom, human wisdom can agree to, that your life will be better and you will be happier if you can muster some modicum of self-discipline at the beginning of your spiritual path. Let's continue here. Ela ach verak lahachsharas haderech lahagboras hatzura ala chaimer. The role, the purpose, the function of Kabbalah's oil is only to prepare the way, to prime the situation, so to speak, so that there can be a predominance of the tzura over the chaimer. That means, very loosely translated, spirituality over materiality. We're not breaking anyone. We're not hurting anyone. God forbid. What we're doing is we're using Kabbalah's oil as a first step, as a foundation to put you on a path where ultimately you will be able to put your spirituality before your materiality. In very simple terms, what are we talking about? We're talking about just the idea of being able to delay gratification, being able to be humble and not get your way, being able to recognize that sometimes it's better to stick to, not sometimes, but that it's better to stick to your principles than to get what you wanted. These are all ideas of Hagbaras Hatzura ala Chaimer, where you are able to think in terms of abstraction and values and principles and put that first instead of materiality, which means bodily comfort and animalistic drives. So in order to get somebody on that path, at the beginning at least, it does require Kabbalah's oil. But it's not to hurt the person, God forbid, it's to get them started on the path. The Rebbe continues. What is this path? Okay, to lift up the tzura ala chaimer, the spirituality over the materiality. The truth over the falsehood. The true good, which is ultimately not just the spiritual good, but it's also ultimately it proves to be good for you in this world, al hara, over the bad. So much here to unpack. Kabbalah's oil is to start you on the path so that ultimately you're able to make good choices, where you can choose the spiritual over the material, the true over the false, and the good over the bad. And the Rebbe says parenthetically, when we say good, we don't just mean good in the spiritual sense, but ultimately the good that is good in the spiritual sense is also good for you, even in the most practical, physical sense. So again, the idea is, even though you're starting with submission, ultimately, what are you submitting to? Not something that's there to negate your happiness, but ultimately something that's to promote your happiness and your fulfillment and your satisfaction. And that this is the best way of life, even from a practical perspective. And that's what Kabbalah's oil really is. Okay, so if it's so good, why don't you just convince me? Why don't you just tell me that it's so good for me? Why do you have to bring in Kabbalah's oil? Okay, so we explain. Since a person is born like a wild donkey, a child is animalistic. You know, a 3-year-old will tantrum and fall on the floor and not allow anybody to get on with life until he gets what he wants, and that's he has no compunction, he has no shame. That's what a child is, right? So when I know we all say, oh, children are so pure, they're so innocent, they're so sweet. Sometimes, yeah, but the animalistic drive in a child, for God-given reasons, by the way, because if a baby and a toddler didn't have this crazy survival drive, then they wouldn't make it through infancy and childhood. So it's very important that a baby will wake up the whole house in the middle of the night in order to nurse, because if a baby's going to be polite, it's not too good for their survival. But ultimately, you have to grow out of that. Okay, so since a person is born with this really strong survival drive, and using the words of King Solomon, v'nefis titoifna sfas or sifse zara v'rak achrisa morekalaina. It says that the lips of the foreign woman are dripping with sweetness, but the end of getting involved with her is bitter like wormwood. In other words, King Solomon is using that he's using the temptation of harlotry as a byword for all temptation. That it's geschmack in the beginning, but it's really painful in the end. And that's one of the things that mature people learn, that some things are fun when they start, but they end up really miserable at the end. Like any indulgence, it feels good in the beginning, but it's just a natural thing that in the end it comes back to bite you. Well, here's the thing. in the end, especially when you're young and experienced and you haven't had a lot of consequences yet. You haven't had enough life experience to have enough time to have experienced the consequences yet. So it's very hard to explain to people, you know, if you don't take care of this when you're young, it's going to come back to bite you when you're old. Okay, so that's sort of the paradox here of why Kabbalah's oil is necessitated here, because on one hand, Kabbalah's oil is good for you in the end, and in the end, you're going to see that it was for your benefit. It wasn't to hurt you, it was only to help you. Okay, fine. If it's only to help me, then just tell me that. Don't force me. You don't have to force me. If it's good for me, you should be able to explain it to me. Yeah, but the problem is, first of all, person is born with this wild nature. Okay, that's the nature of youth. Second of all, the negative consequences of not submitting to divine authority, that's not always readily apparent. So in the beginning of your service of Hashem, you are going to need to take certain things on faith and just accept it and say, you know what, I'm submitting to people who know better than me. I'm submitting to the wisdom of the Torah, which is categorically beyond my ability to fathom. Okay, I'm just Kabbalah's oil. I accept the yoke. So in the end, you'll see that it is good for you. And even non-Jewish books say that it's good for you. But you don't necessarily see it completely clearly in the beginning. And that's why you need to have Kabbalah's oil in the beginning. Okay. So therefore, tzrich aliyas haschalasa basiya vafilo b'derech Kabbalah's oil. That's why when you start off, it has to be done with Kabbalah's oil. Kachol shetia haschala zu amuka yeser tukdam ha'avona shezeu aderech l'hatoy va'emes. And that being that this is the deeper, I guess, yeah. Let me just back up here. Kachol shetia haschala zu amuka yeser tukdam ha'avona shezeu aderech l'hatoy va'emes. Yeah. So the deeper this Kabbalah's oil is, the deeper ingrained, this is another paradox, the deeper ingrained the Kabbalah's oil is, the sooner you'll actually get to see why it's not just Kabbalah's oil, it's also good for you. Moving gamkein she afsher likbaya masmeres kama zman tayrich hanhoga b'derech Kabbalah's oil b'yomim v'shois. Now, it's also understood that I can't give you a timeline how long a child needs to have Kabbalah's oil for. You can't say to me, well, how long is it going to take before I realize that this is really good for me and that I don't have to do it just as submission? I can't give you a timeline, how many days or hours it's going to be. It depends on the person, on their characteristics. It depends on the conditions of the place and on the time. So there's no hard and fast rule for how long that developmental phase is going to take. It takes as long as it takes. Okay. Now there's another concept. I know we're only halfway through this letter. It is what it is. I apologize for the length of it, but it's on the long side. Okay. Now the letter takes a personal turn. Till now it was talking about education and about how to deal with the youth and the need for Kabbalah's oil. Here the Rebbe is addressing this young woman. I don't know, actually she's young, but this woman's self-doubt about the work she's doing with these girls. I guess she was saying that it's difficult. She's not sure she's getting through to them. The typical stuff that any educator grapples with. That's what it seems here. Okay. It's already been explained in contexts that are similar to your situation. Asher toiv chalkeno v'yafa gerolenu. We're lucky. We have a fortunate lot. Shenoiladnu bedora deikvasa de Mashiach, that we were born in the generation before Mashiach's coming. Normally that's not considered such a great thing. It's a time of turmoil and confusion to be born right before Mashiach's coming, right? But here the Rebbe says it's a wonderful thing. We're very lucky to have been born at this time, at the end of the Gullus. Why? La'achrei shigilu lanu kol kach oir b'teresenu teres chayim ubefrat b'teres achsidis. Because we live in an age where so much Torah was revealed, especially the teachings of Chassidus. Think, if you would have been born 200 years ago, these secrets that you are privy to, you wouldn't be able to know. You wouldn't be able to find out. Maybe if you be a Lamed Vavnik, one of the Tzaddikim Nistarim, you go meet with their private meetings in the forest, maybe you'd hear some of this stuff. But regular people, to know the stuff that we know because of the way that Chassidus was revealed, we're so lucky that we live in such a day and age. The information age, so to speak. The information age in a holy context. Ube protius b'teiras Chassidus Chabad. And especially we're lucky that there's so much Chabad Chassidic teachings available to us. That what's so special about Chabad Chassidic teachings? Shel bisho ha'nyonim ha'amukim beyeser afilu mesedes ha'teira be'esias u'bidiburim ha'muvanim l'chol echad ve'echad imrak yesh loi haratzin lezeh. Chabad Chassidus takes the deepest secrets of the Torah, very abstract, abstruse, esoteric ideas, and puts it in language that is accessible and understandable to anyone who has the will to do so. Obviously, if you have no will to do so, it's not going to work. But if you have a will to do so, Chabad Chassidus, the whole point of Chabad, Chochmah Bin Adas, is that it takes that which is normally so lofty that it has to just be accepted on faith, and it brings it into intellectual discourse where you can speak about it intelligently. So aren't we so lucky that we live in a day and age where these tools are available to us? If we lived in a previous generation or century, we wouldn't have access to this information. Okay, now, that's very nice. What does this have to do with her self-doubt about being an educator? So let's continue. So now let's connect this to your situation. Hina yedua piskim kveid kedushes meide v'chami admor zecher tzadik v'kodesh levrocha l'chayelim habod nishmose begin zemerebim zechus hayogen elenu b'shem oviv kveid kedushes admor merashab. It is known, the saying of my father-in-law, the Rebbe, which he said in the name of his father, the Rebbe Rashab. Asher. Now tell me if you recognize this saying. Hayetzahar lapam mislabish bi'itztala shel meshi. Sometimes the Yetzer Hara dresses up in a silk garment, to look very frum. Bichdei l'ramis ha'adam, to trick the person. Remember this? We had this in one of our earlier letters. I think it was letter number 6 that we learned on Purim. The letter about Zohir Tvei, about finding your special mitzvah. So over there, it mentioned this, and it mentioned that it's the Hayem Yem of who remembers. Because it was a date that was connected to Purim. We learned that letter on Purim. Chav Gimel Sivan, that's correct, yes. So, that's the Hayem of Chav Gimel Sivan. That sometimes the Yetzer Hara, the Nefesh Bamis, can come to a person, and instead of telling him to sin, which the person will just reject, he comes to him and he tries to get him to do good things, but good things that are a distraction from his real purpose. So that's what it means. The Yetzer Hara dressed up in a silk robe, trying to look very holy. Really, what is he doing? He's playing a bait and switch. He's trying to divert you from your real purpose. Okay, so here the Rebbe invokes that. How do you figure this out? Like, what's the test, the litmus test to figure out that this is what's happening? Anything that holds you back from getting stuff done, mekerehu maluma zeh It's coming from the other side, meaning sitra achra, negativity. V'gam min nidain dido, and that is exactly so in your case. So something that sounds like a holy argument, but its end result, its net result, is that it holds you back from getting your job done. It holds you back from avodah b'poil, doing stuff, being active. Then you know that that's the Chassidish Yetzer Hara just trying to mess with you. Okay. Hasfekes v'hatainis shemenim legamri al koponim machlishim avedasa b'poil. These doubts you're having, even though they're holy doubts, I mean, the Rebbe doesn't say that explicitly, but it's clear in this context, she must have phrased her doubts in some type of righteous way. Like she must have made it sound like it was coming from a religious place. And, just parenthetically, it reminds me of a story. Chassid once was in Yechidus with the Tzemach Tzedek. And the Tzemach Tzedek told him to become a malamed, to become a school teacher. And he said, I'm afraid to become, because in Shulchan Aruch it talks about the laws of Talmud Torah, and about a malamed who's misrashel, who's lax, who's lazy with his students. It says very harsh things about that. So he says, I'm afraid to become a malamed because it's like too scary if you don't do the job right. The punishments are pretty harsh. So the Tzemach Tzedek said, and who should become a malamed? Who should become a malamed? The guy who's not afraid of the ramifications. So you shouldn't become a malamed because you're afraid of the ramifications of not doing your job well. So then if you don't do, so who's going to be the guy who does it? Oh, I'm okay. I'll do it. I'm not afraid of the, okay. I want the guy who feels unworthy, right? So anyways, she must have done something similar to that, like basically disqualified herself and said, oh, I'm no good. I'm not holy enough. I'm not righteous enough. I'm not pure enough, or whatever it is. And the Rebbe is saying that's like the Yetzer Hara in the silk robe coming to you and being all holy, but really in the end, what is he doing? You can tell he's a Yetzer Hara because he's just holding you back from getting avodah b'poil done, actual work. So then you have to dismiss it. Yeah. So bevade einem boyim harotzin umeyetzer hatov. This self-doubt is certainly not coming from any good will or good inclination. Ubeloshin harav es ken zayin a frume nefesh abamis ve'eret noch a chassidische nefesh abamis. There could be an animal soul that's very religious, in fact, very chassidic. Sometimes this frumer or chassidische nefesh abamis can even come to you and tell you, go learn Chassidus, and go meditate into some deep Chassidic concept. It sounds so holy, it sounds so good. Really, it was just a trick of the Yetzer Hara. It was just one of the schemes of the Nefesh Abamis, limnaya ma'aveda, to hold you back from getting your job done. The whole thing was a diversion. He was telling you to do something good because he knew if he would tell you to do something bad, you wouldn't listen. You would identify him. You would, the jig is up. I know you. You're the Yetzer Hara. Go take a hike. But instead, he comes to you all holy and he says, go do something good. Go do something pure. And, oh, okay, fine, let's do it. But what did he do? He got you. He diverted you from your task that you have to get done. So too, the Rebbe is saying, all your self-doubts, even if you couch them in religious words, the net result is it's just holding you back from working with these kids. And therefore, we can identify without any doubt this is not coming from a good place and it must be rejected. Okay, let's continue. This is a related concept. She says she's interested in having an influence, having an effect on others. But according to her own assessment, she's not knowledgeable enough. So basically, she's disqualifying herself. Maybe she disqualified herself in other ways as well. But one of the things she said to the Rebbe is, who am I kidding? You know what we call this today, in 2022? Imposter syndrome. Who am I kidding? I'm going to teach these girls? What do I know? I barely know more than them. Maybe sometimes I don't even know more than them. And I have to fake it. And I'm wasting their time. Find somebody who really knows what they're doing. That's what it sounds like the girl was saying. Okay, or the woman was saying. So the Rebbe responds to that. The Rebbe says, okay, how about this? I'll agree with you. Let's say, for argument's sake, that you don't know what you're talking about, okay? That you are not knowledgeable enough to be the teacher. Okay, for argument's sake, I'll give it to you. Hine b'derenu zeh, in our generation, bifrat especially, ubechlal b'chol haderes, and the truth is, in all generations, af im eine yecheles laseis es kol hameya ochus, even if you can't give 100%, tzarich laseis es ha'efshari, give what you can. Give what you can. Don't be a perfectionist. What do they say? The enemy of the good is the best. Right? I don't want to even do good because I can't do the best. Stop it already. Give whatever you can, and then the Rebbe adds, "Ulispalo laHashem yisbarach she'yinatzal kol yechelis lahesef kahena v'kahena," and then daven to Hashem that He should take the whatever it is that you're able to give, whether it's 50% or 20% or 80%, whatever it is, and that Hashem should amplify that. But it's not a reason to stop being an influencer. So the fact that you're going to tell me I don't have 100% of what these girls have, what they need. Okay, what do you have? 50%? 20%? It doesn't matter. Give whatever percent you're capable of giving, and then daven that Hashem should amplify that. But don't stop. Don't stop being an influencer. Ubifrat lefi hamatzav be'eretz hakodesh tiboniv sikenin, especially now in Eretz Yisrael, asher gale hakfira hamilchoma, there are waves of heresy waging war, neged ha'mesedes ha'leches v'chazaka. There's war against the tradition that is growing, expanding. And you have no right, nobody has a right to sit this out if they have any ability to do something about this. There are these waves of assimilation in Israel warring against tradition. And if you can do anything, even a tiny amount, to stave that off, you don't have a right to sit it out because of your inferiority complex or your imposter syndrome. Yeah. Ve'im la'es ata ein biyacholtei li'es mefaked roshei or mefaked choshuv, mefaked roshi or mefaked choshuv, that if till now you're not in a position to be a high-ranking officer, all of lamales es tafkidei amut, all of kechol yecholte, so just do your best, do what you can. Ukamei b'machama gashmis, like in an actual war, in an actual military. Even if you can't be a general or a top-ranking official, and then you'll work through the ranks. You'll get a promotion. You start off as a private, you become a corporal, you become a sergeant. Eventually, you'll get promoted. You got to start off though at the first level. We see this for ourselves. This is a known thing. I don't have to prove this to you. I don't have to back this up. Go. This is the way of the world. People start off on a simple level and they work their way up. So just do that. If you'll just go and use your talents and your knowledge, whatever talents and knowledge you have, Shieshla ato, whatever you have now, kechol yecholta, whatever ability, to your best ability now. Ubekiven hatoiv, and use it in a good direction. Muftachani, I'm sure, I guarantee, Shetira haperis bizman korev, you're going to see results very soon. V'loirak batzolos v'kiyam nefesh achas, not just saving one person, shegam zehu elamoli, which, by the way, even saving one person is saving a world. Elakama v'kama nefashis v'chulu, but you're going to save many souls, meaning you're going to save many worlds. So just start with whatever meager abilities you have, and I promise you, very soon you're going to see results. You're going to save lives. You can't leave these girls hanging. These girls need you. So please stop with the self-disqualifying. Okay. And like I wrote in my previous letter, there's a previous letter to this. I don't know if this previous letter is the one that's in Chelik Tes of the Igrus. There may be more letters to this woman, but certainly there is one to this same woman that's in Chelik Tes of Igrus. So like I wrote to her in the previous letter, as hakel asa Hashem yisbarach yafa bi'itei v'mekeme v'sviva shalai. Hashem does everything in the right time and the right way. V'kevin shazach sehi madas anash v'chabad. So since you are fortunate enough that you are part of the Chabad community, zehu amokim be yechela lakabel sipik nafsha ayidei milui tafkida hamutol aleha. That's the place where you're going to find fulfillment in discharging your duty. Al yidei hashgacha pratis halyena sheviasa lamokim pleni, because divine providence brought you to this particular place, ubizman pleni, at this particular time. Everyone knows Hashem is the ultimate good. Therefore, when Hashem gives a person a duty, Hashem has already granted that person the ability, the potential. I mean, you got to cash it in, but Hashem has already given you the potential to rise to that task. I wish you would just use out your potential 100%. Okay, so this is also one of the things you see a lot from the Rebbe, and we had this in a previous letter about the Reish Gargusa, right? Even the warden of a well, the block party committee chairman, even a small, remember the letter to Rabbi Rosenberg from Titus Emes, the Rebbe said, if you have any type of authority, don't think that happened randomly. That was Hashgacha El Yena. The Rebbe calls it here Hashgacha Pratis El Yena, sort of a double thing. Hashgacha Pratis El Yena. Specific from on high. Sometimes it's Hashgacha Pratis, sometimes it's Hashgacha El Yena. Here the Rebbe says it both, Pratis El Yena. That if you have some position of authority, Hashem chose you for that. That was directly from on high. So you have to realize Hashem knows what He's doing, and Hashem is good, and He put you into this position already armed with whatever it is that you're going to need to be able to effectively discharge your duty. Okay. Another concept here. Now that Rebbe speaks about the girls' Fabrengens, and this I think is the third time that we've had in 15 letters that Rebbe mentioned women's Fabrengens. And Kan HaMokim, this would be a good place to mention the Fabrengen that's going to be Oyel Yud Aleph Nisan at the Oyel. Please reserve, it is RSVP only, the women's gathering. About a block from the Oyel. It is limited in space, so go to 30days.com if you are interested in attending that event. Again, Oyel Yud Aleph Nisan, that is Monday night, April 11th. Okay, so the Rebbe says, regarding what you wrote about the girls' Fabrengens, Hare Kafi Shehera Hanisayin, experience has proven here and in many places. Shertzio hein atzman v'chayetze bezeh. If you get the girls themselves involved by getting them to speak, it gets them more involved, it gets them more interested. We had something similar to that, if you remember the letter to Rabbi Schusterman, that I think that was the night going into Purim. Yeah, that was the night going into Purim. We had the letter to Rebbe Schusterman from Chicago, and the Rebbe said it was good that you had that junior minyan where you gave them jobs. One could be a gabbai, one could be a shamish, because when they have responsibility, they get more involved. Similarly here, the Rebbe is saying, at the Farbrengens, get the girls to speak, give them a Dvar Torah to prepare and to give over, and that will make sure that they're very engaged. Okay, that's, do we have people who are willing to speak? Yud Aleph Nissen? Let us know at 30 letters, 30 days, 30 letters, 30days.com. Yeah, now, regarding the shows, the productions, they call it productions, regarding the shows that you make periodically, the Rebbe says, it's really good, I like it. Very, very good. They're doing like dramas, some type of, they're putting on performances. The Rebbe says, very, very good. But just be careful about certain things that a lot of times people are not careful about. Even though these things are actually forbidden according to Torah, and yet people tend to be, I guess, what do you call lax. People tend to be lax about it. Like for girls to wear men's clothing, don't do that. In a production, sometimes you have a girl playing a male character, right? So you have to be careful about that. Inyanim shel zimra berabim. Also be careful about, the Kol Isha issues about women singing in public. Obviously, if it's done in a way where it's a women's audience and it's done privately, then that's fine. The Rebbe is saying just be careful that that's the way it is done. And Yoni Tairuvas, you also have to be careful about mixing of genders and all that kind of stuff. Anyways, the productions, the plays that they're doing are excellent. Keep it up. Just, make sure to make everything correct according to halacha. Okay, almost done. Remember when this letter was from, right? We said that this letter was, wow, how many pages is this letter? Yud Ches Tevis. Okay, fine. So Yud Ches Tevis. So now the Rebbe is going to speak about Yud Shvat, which is about 3 weeks henceforth. Yud Shvat being the Yortzeit, the Yom Hilula of the Rebbe's Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe. Bekesher im Yemo Asira B'Shvat Haba. In connection with Yud Shvat that's coming up. Inyan hoya shetatzia lahanaitis valkolponim lakshishais shebehen shekol achas tichtev masa hanegea be'eze miktzaya shalavedis kved kedushas meida v'chamia admor zecher tzadik v'kodesh levrocha l'chayim leilam haba nishmasi begins in miremim nizuchose yogan elenu sichesev chulu v'chulu. It will be a good thing if the girls, at least the older girls, should write an essay about some aspect of my father-in-law's avoda or some of his sichas, etc., etc. I find this very interesting also. Wow, if I had another hour, I would speak all about the need to get students to think creatively, critically, and to write their own thoughts. See, the Rebbe was very into that. Short answer tests, which are so common in, unfortunately, most schools for various reasons. They are good at forcing people to cram for tests. They're good at rewarding people who are good at retaining memory without necessarily comprehension. But if you want people to think things through and understand it, you got to get them to communicate. So the Rebbe was telling this teacher, I want them to write essays. Let them write essays about my father-in-law, the Rebbe, and that should be part of their preparation for the Yortzeit on Yud Shvat. Bivrocha shetagdil ishtatfusa b'chinuch hatzeiros. with blessings, that you should increase your involvement in the education of our young girls. Masim rotzein rabesein nesienu akadeshim. You should increase, the Rebbe gives her a bracha to increase her involvement in educating the girls in accordance with the desire of our holy Rebbes. In other words, not according to your desire. That's not enough. According to the desire of the Rebbes, which that's a tall order, but the Rebbe's giving her a bracha here. V'tira schar toiv ba'amala. You're going to see good reward for your toil. V'reiv nachas biladeha shichyu. You're going to see a lot of nachas from your own children. The Rebbe said this very often, that when you take care of other people's children, the Eibishter takes care of your children. I'm awaiting good news in all of the aforementioned. Bivrocha lahektim b'cholanal. And I'm giving you a bracha that all of what we spoke about should happen quickly, should happen soon. Wow. So much here to unpack, to think about. And thank you for bearing with me. I'm sorry that it took this long, but sometimes that's how long it takes. We'll see you tomorrow night.